Today in the workshop we're going to do again the Ringfield motor. There's some new guys came on and they may not have seen what went before, so I'm going to do it again so that they can find, they know how to strip them and rebuild them. So once I've got the camera set up, as usual, I'll be back. Okay folks, here we are back, and I've got my box with my loco in it, and this time it's my favourite A4 Walter Wingham, and I've had it for a few years now. She has been overhauled before, but I'm going to do it again. I don't think she'll need much, being quite honest about it, but just to let the folks see how it's done. So, first of all, we lift off the tender top, and we're left with the chassis block and the tender surround. So the first thing we do is remove the spade connectors. I should have a pair of tweezers about here somewhere, folks. First of all, take that off, and then if I can should have a pair of pliers as well, come thinking. Here they are. Seems to be very stubborn for some reason. Right, I got it off. Oh, there's a wee bit of rust in there. And the wires came off. I'll show them that later on. I'll stick it in this jar so I don't lose it. So there we have, I'll put that one off as well, that wire. Some, as I said before, some of them have that wee wire there. It's an earth wire, some of them don't, so don't worry about it if it's not there. So what we need to do is, we need to remove the tender frame, the motor block from the tender frame. And to do that, you just get a screwdriver, stick it down there and lever it up. And there it comes out. So we're now got the chassis block there, ready to disassemble the rest of it. Now, newcomers, listen very carefully. Sometimes these two metal strips have got screws at the top of them, and you undo the screws, but you have to make sure, put your finger on that end of it, because under there's a very fine spring holding the brush in. So you've got to make sure that it doesn't ping, because if these springs ping, and you will never find them again. You're always better to have some spares in your workshop box. So what we do with these ones, they don't have springs. Wait a minute, I'll think of. No, I don't. I thought I had one with the springs on it, but I don't. They're not here anyway. Right. So what we do is we just lift these very, very gently. You can see that spring's trying to come out right now without even. There we are. Now I don't know try and zoom in a wee bit maybe. There you are, and the spring is right there and it's already popped. So what we do is, I should have a wee plastic bag line or something. That's the worst about a workshop bench, you get into such a muddle, you're doing so many different things. I'll just use this wee jar again. So I just stick my wee screwdriver through there and gently lift the spring out into the jar so that it's in there. Now sometimes the brush will drop out. This one's no going in. So what we'll do is we will lift this other side up. Again, the spring is already lifted. But we just lift it out and into the jar. Remember, put the lid on the jar. Don't get caught out like I do. So there we have the motor with these two things lifted. If you've got to unscrew them, hold your finger on that end, undo the screw and gently just lift up and it should be okay. So the next stage is to get this face plate off of here. And if you go into the back, you will see two holes just at the top of the gears, two holes. Sometimes there's not two holes, sometimes you can actually see two wee plastic pegs poking through the metal. So the principle is the same. What we do is we stick our screwdriver inside there and gently lift the wee peg. You can see it quite deep in. Sometimes it can be a bit of a footer to get them out. Just don't be too rough with them because they can break off quite easily. Anyway, that's one of them. The two of them come out. Now, when these two pegs come out, the face plate will lift off of here. So take a screwdriver and just kind of lever it up at the bottom, because there's another two pegs at the bottom, you see. So if you just gently lift it off, and there it is. That's it off. Now, now that we've got it off, what we can do is put it over the top of your jar, and just poke the brushes through. Now, I came across, I was doing those of you who saw the Chinese locomotive I did, the Chinese manufactured Hornby Duchess, I had bothered getting the springs out and the brushes were stuck as well. What I had to do, I had to poke them through, and then I had to kind of widen these two holes. What I think has happened is the commutator has been dirty and there's a wee bit of heat built up and it's actually melted the plastic. Because I heard somebody else asking me about that, if I had ever come across it, and I said yes I did. But his actually, according to him, I never actually saw it, but I'm not disproving him, this bit of the plastic had all melted inside. If you're listening, pal, I know what you're talking about. This one, the one I had hardly melted, but yours had, and I think he was going to put a new one on it. I think it was a Flying Scotsman, come to think it as well. Anyway, that's that. So, basically, that is what you should end up with. And this commutator's not too bad. I must admit she's not ran for a while, to be quite honest about it. I think it was 2 years ago she ran. So, moving on to my favourite bit, or some of you may say that, that I've seen the workshop before. I'm very, very reluctant. In fact, I just don't do it. Using things like alcohol, using things like lighter fuel. Guys do it. But I heard about one chap that was doing it, and I don't know what happened, but he ended up with first degree burns on his chest and face. So try and use something. Don't use a scratch brush, a fibre brush. Don't use one of them because you'll scratch the commutator, and then you'll be even. My method is to use T-cut for car paint work. It's a very mild cleaner, and that's why I use it, because I don't want to scratch the wheels or the commutator or anything like that. I want a smooth finish, but without the risk of causing any injuries through carelessness. And it doesn't have to be carelessness. All these things have a flash point, lighter fuel and alcohol and what have you, and I just don't think it's worth taking the risk. When I do workshops, I do them safely. Now, having said all that, I'm going to put my hand right up and say now, T-cut is inflammable, but it doesn't have the same flash point that things like lighter fuel have. And if you're doing workshops, guys that have done them before, I have heard them say, oh, get an adult to supervise you. That's fine giving that advice, but how many of them actually do it? So, on with the job in hand, and we just take the T-cut on a cotton bud, and you can actually see right now all the muck dissolving, and you just work it in. I've heard all the arguments, and I just think that safety is paramount in this kind of hobby. It's a hobby you've got, you don't want to burn your house down. And Jimmy, who's the guy that ended up with the burns, he said to me, he says, I was one of the guys that said it would never happen to me, and it did. So that's just my, I've heard one guy saying to me, oh, a wee drop isopropylene or lighter fuel in the end of a cotton bud's not going to injure you. Well, Jimmy's a witness to what happened. He said that it would never happen to him, and it did. And he ended up with skin grafts and a lot of things. So, we let that sink in for a wee minute. There's your cotton bud. There's that now. You can see the dirt that's on it. Just let that dry. And what you do is, if I can find my other cotton buds, just we're at home. Thing with them. There they are. By the way, make sure you've got plenty, because you are going to use them. You will use them. Here we are, right? Let's go with that. I have got a few other workshops coming up in the near future. I'm still working on the scale, not the scale sheets, the Metcalf buildings that were handed into the club. The more that I seem to kind of try and beef them up a wee bit, the more I end up with. Right, so we just take the cotton bud and just start to wipe it off the commutator. And it doesn't matter, by the way, it doesn't matter how many cotton buds you use. Don't keep using the same dirty one, because you'll not manage to get rid of the T-cut. Just keep working away until eventually when you rub the commutator with the cotton bud, there's no more black deposits on it. That's how you know you've got it. You must make sure you get it all off. That's imperative. I like to hold it and stop the gear turning, you see. If I can do that. I can see it even better now. I'm trying to look at the camera and look at this at the same time to see, make sure you can see what's going on. I must say I have found a lot worse commutators than this to clean. One of them, you couldn't actually see the commutator itself for muck. You can see the amount of stuff that's coming off of this, you know, you can see it on the cotton bud. Bud. You must make sure, it's imperative that you make sure you get all this stuff off of that, or you're going to have problems later. Still see on that cotton bud there's still stuff coming off it yet. Things like methylated spirits, by the way, they leave a deposit on, although it evaporates, it does leave a deposit. I found this when I bowled reel-to-reel tape recorder. Cleaned the heads, and then I discovered that it was actually leaving a deposit on them, so I stopped using it for that reason. I've turned it round this way so I can see it through the lights hitting, so I can see I've got all the muck off it. Now, that's the way it should come up, nice and shiny. There should be no dirt on it at all to cause problems later on. Take what I can do, I can take some of the dirty bits off so I've got a reasonably clean tip, just to make sure that everything's off it. You want to make sure you've got it all. The reason that you don't use a fibre brush on this is because it will clean it, but you end up with scratches all over the commutator. And as the brushes wear, the carbon from the wearing bit of the brushes gets into all these wee nooks and crannies, and you're going to be cleaning it a lot sooner than you should need to clean it. You want it, the commutator, nice and clean. And I can still see stuff on that. Don't worry how long it takes you to do this, by the way, because you'll reap the benefits of it. There, it's a nice clean commutator. I don't know if I can come in any further than that. Focus. There we are. Now you can see from that just how clean it needs to be. And that's brilliant. So putting that aside, we'll go back to the faceplate here. Just using a dry cotton bud, or even the one you just used on me, just make sure you get all any old oil and stuff off. I'll zoom the camera back out again so you can know. So you can see. Actually, there's no point in doing a workshop if you can't see it. One of the things that I have seen on Facebook is guys saying that what are these wee brown things across the motor terminals, and what they actually are, these wee things are capacitors, and they're there. Well, the original reason for them being there is for television interference. Remember back when I was a kid, my train set with my mother couldn't see the television, she used to go up the heat. That's why. Nowadays, digital TV, you don't tend to get that interference, but don't remove them. Because the reason the interference was there was the sparking between the commutator and the brushes. And if we take the capacitor out, you're going to end up with sparks, a lot worse sparks than you would have otherwise. Between the brushes, and the commutator will wear, so will the brushes wear. So you want to keep that to a minimum. So for DC control, you don't need DC control. Keep them in. Apparently DCC has this built into the chip, or so I've been told. I don't know whether that's true or not. I can't vouch for that. Right. So there we have our motor cleaned. We've also done the faceplate, so that's ready to go back on. Now to put it back on, there's your two holes for your top two pegs, and there at the bottom, I don't know whether the camera's picking up, zoom in again. there, just above the wheels, are the two holes for the bottom pegs. So what you do is you put the bottom pegs in first, get them in, and the top half just clips in. That's it in. There we are. And you've got the, make sure it turns okay. There shouldn't be a problem actually. Now, going back to our jar, which is here. The first thing shaggy bit there. The first thing we do is get your brushes. Now, most of the brushes, you won't see this. It's got a kind of cone end on it, and that goes up the way so that it's facing you. And I just put it there and kind of tip it, and then in goes the brush. Here it is. That's it in. Same with the other one. Make sure they're clean, by the way. I've tried to use tweezers for this, but it very rarely works. And there is your two brushes in. Now, this is the tricky bit. This is the bit I always dread, the springs. Get them in your screwdriver, you probably won't see that. And just very carefully put them over the brush. It's not as easy as it looks, by the way, I'll tell you that right now. You just got to watch that the spring, as they say, does not spring. If you can get them so far in and bring the clamp down on top of it, it doesn't always work like that either. That one in. Get hold of the other spring. And then, right, on these, by the way, there's a wee dot, a wee indentation, and that on the other side, of course, it's raised. So the idea is to get the brush into that wee raised bit. There we have it. She's in. Now that we've got that in, we can test it with my trusty power supply here, which I always have. What we do is we just we're getting nothing. I don't know why. No fire off. Hopefully this is also going now. As I said, away she goes. And that's all there is to it, to overhaul these things. Need to put these things back in. Now that we've got this back together, we can put the earth wire back on. There it is now. And the other side of the spade. Oops. Goes on there. Now, as I said, some of the Hornby motors had this wire. It was an earth wire from there to there. Other ones don't, and the other ones that don't, I'm going to take that back up if I can get it. The ones that don't, let's see if you can see this. There's a wee nodule there. Well, the ones that don't have a nodule in behind here. So you've got to make sure that this bit hits the nodule to give you the return circuit. It took me a while to discover this actually, but that's how you get the return circuit. But in this case the wire's on it, so that's fine. However, a wee word of warning here. I had one of these, and obviously between the wheels and the chassis block there has to be a connection somewhere. And what actually happened was, oops, the actual axle, both of them, by the way, not which one, both of them were covered in rust or some form of corrosion. And that's where, and I can't emphasise this more, that's the only place that I discovered that I could use a fibre brush. And this one's okay, but if you discover that, if you should discover that, what I did was I cleaned it up with a fibre brush, and then I put it in with just put a wee bit of oil on the axle, and I put it in, and I just let it turn, and I could feel the roughness inside the axle, and eventually it disappeared when we got rid of all the stuff that was in there, and that gave the connection back. So if you ever come across that, check your axles of your wheels. If you find that some of your locomotives aren't going through the points, check your back to back. Now, some wheels just drop out, and you can just lay them on the track and see, just push them through and see if they're hitting the frogs or they're hitting the check rails. Then you can just leave them out till they don't. That's how I do it. Right, we'll go back to our power unit just to make sure that everything's running sweetly. Turn it down a wee bit. No problem. Running very, very sweetly. As far as lubrication is concerned, one drop. I don't know how far I can come. I've tried this before. One drop behind that gear. One drop, that's all, don't put any more. And the same on that axle, just let it drop in. If your locomotive is squealing when it's running, that's what's up. So it's these two bearings in the motor. And we just one drop, and I emphasise that, just one drop, no more, or you'll end up with problems. Gears, don't use oil in gears, because what will happen is you will end up, the minute you start up the motor, the gears start to turn and fling the oil everywhere. So you can get a white grease on eBay. I can't mind the name of it. I'll have to check that up for you. Just a wee dab, and let the gears do the rest. Spread it about. You're not flinging it everywhere. That's the key. So we can now put this back in to this. Which side? So you put it in. This end goes in first, and then you just press down that end and it clicks in. That's all. There's nothing difficult. Now, the next stage is to check that the continuity between the front pin between the loco and the tender is working. So put one wire on there. Now you can see from that the wires on the pin touch the wheels and it should turn. That goes to show that the continuity is there. If you did that and it didn't work, go for the axles. Wheels are nice and clean as well. And that's it. That's all there is to it with these motors. You may have problems with the locomotive, the connection between the locomotive, but normally it's this bit here that causes a bother. One of the things that I came across, there was a contractor around the corner doing a job, and I came across a bit of this kind of insulation stuff. They had it around scaffolding to stop folk bumping their heads, but it's a great wee thing if you're doing a workshop just for the locomotive to sit in there. It's a cradle. Doesn't cost you anything. Brilliant. And you can just show that it does work. Yeah, it's running. I have got the DCC Concepts Rolling Road. My wife bought me that for Christmas, the 12 thingy version of it. I intend to build a test bed for it with a voltmeter and an ammeter on it for testing how much the currents it's dropping. By the way, let's do it as a curiosity. Just let's see how much current this is doing now. I know it's not under load, I know that. I know it's not under load, but I just like to know. It just gives you some idea of how good or bad your motor is. About quarter of an amp that's drawn at the moment. Now it's not hauling anything, I understand that. And it's sitting at 8 volts at the moment. That's 6 volts. And it's just below quarter of an amp. But as I said, it's not drawn in. It's just good to be able to see how much your loco is drawing. And once I get the DCC Concepts Rolling Road going, I'll be able to even have more accuracy. So there we are, guys. That's how to overhaul these motors if you haven't bothered. I hope this has helped you. If you have any queries, let us know. If you like the workshops, let us know if you've got one that you want us to do. If you don't like it, tell us why. And we'll catch you later. Keep on modelling, keep on shunting, and may God bless you.